Yeah, that feels about right. Welcome back to another episode of Tyrannus Customs. This is my fully independent Yerf Dog cross cart. She's clearly a custom job. And in today's episode, we're gonna get this front end built.
Time for the moment of truth. Is it gonna fit? Oh. All right, we're close. All the holes line up perfectly. Only problem is I made my big winged brackets a little too big and a little too winged, and they don't fit inside the wheel, but it's pretty close. So I'm just gonna hit it with the flap disc and see what happens. Check this thing out. Oh my God, I'm so hyped. The wheel finally fits. Shout out to Go Power Sports for making these custom adapters for me. I designed them in CAD and they were cool enough to print them out. That's not a service that they usually offer, but if you want to support Go Power Sports, you should pick up some of their gussets. These are all CNC cut steel gussets that you can use in your builds that not only are super functional, you'll find a million uses for them, but they look really cool, and it's a distinctive Go Power Sports staple. Anyways, this is pretty much our ride height at full droop.
As it sits right now, this is about 11 inches of clearance, which is pretty crazy. But I'm thinking maybe an off-road mode down here, and then a track mode, a little flatter, keep the center of gravity low. I don't know, we'll mess around with that. But now that we've got a rear end, it's time for a front end. My first thought was to, like the other Yerf Dogs, hang the tire out off the front of this nose here. But doing that restricts the space that I have for pedals, and I've also decided to put my master cylinder up here. So I think what I'm gonna do instead is roll these back in a little bit, and we'll mount them back here. Pull the A-arms off this squared off section is gonna make my life really easy. Also, I'll be able to do shorter A-arms, probably run my steering along the back on the floor, and this thing is gonna be epic. I'm also hoping by moving these wheels back, we're gonna get better traction on these front wheels with more weight hanging out over them. And speaking of the redistribution of weight, I'm thinking about cutting out this steel floor pan and replacing it with a diamond plate aluminum one, and taking the steel from this and using it to box in the front to protect your pedals and your feet and everything that's going to be built into the front end of this, while also taking existing weight from the chassis and redistributing it all over those front wheels. I'm really not trying to have understeer in this thing. So yeah, let's get to it. our cross kart's front end, we're going to be using 150cc go-kart hubs, spindles, and full hydraulic brake kit. All these parts can be found at gopowersports.com, and links will be down in the description. In order to adapt these 150cc spindles to our custom A-arms, what I've done is made these cool little brackets that will bolt through with an M10, and you can still fit your 16mm socket in there. Ultimately, this will be one bolt, but I don't have one long enough right now. Now we've got mounting holes for a Heim joint down here for our lower A-arm, Heim joint up top for our upper A-arm, and no issues with clearance. So, I think that is gonna fit up real nice. So here's my mock-up. As you can see, looks pretty good. One thing to keep an eye on is the spindle for these 150cc go-karts has a little bit of camber to it this way. So when I mount this in my suspension system, I'm gonna compensate by giving it a little bit of a tilt. But this looks pretty good. Let's make those A-arms. I made a silly mistake, but thankfully I'm recognizing it now while everything's just tacked. One of the main things you want to keep an eye out for when you're designing A-arms is that you really want the bolt holes of both connection points for each of your A-arms. So this will be the frontmost connection point for the top A-arm, and this will be the backmost connection point for the top A-arm, and this will kind of swoop into here, right? You want to make sure that these are lined up such that if you had an extra long bolt like I have, it'll fit all the way through and all the holes line up. That way you won't get any binding as your arms go up and down. Now, I was so focused on that. The mistake that I made is that the brackets for the top A-arm are too high up above the bottom A-arm. So what I mean is my bolts in the knuckle are 6 inches apart, one on the bottom, one at the top, and these up here are more like 10 inches apart. So we have a much wider gap here and a narrow one here. You can see that the arms are not parallel. What you really want is both your top and bottom A-arm to be parallel if you can help it. Now, because I didn't do that, instead of having that nice, beautiful up and down like we saw with the rear end in the last video, as I bring this up and down, you'll see that's the crazy camber issues we were talking about. So in order to fix this, I'll cut off these top tabs and just weld them in about 2 to 3 inches lower so that our top A-arm and our bottom A-arm are parallel, and we should have no more camber issues. Hi there. A lot just happened in that cut, so let me bring you up to speed. First of all, I broke my lav mic, so sorry about the audio. Secondly, all those tabs that you saw me just weld on so nicely, cut all those off. I had a steering question that I had hit Redbeard up about that we'll talk about later, But in the video that I sent him, he noticed that my A-arms were mounted perfectly flat. And that's because I was getting carried away and treating this thing more like an art project than an off-road vehicle and just trying to follow the body lines. And what he explained to me was what you really want is for your A-arms to be kind of kicked up on a 15-degree angle for off-road. And what that's going to allow it to do is when the suspension goes over bumps, potholes, logs, anything like that, instead of having to go straight up and down in its travel, like the rear of the cart, which I'm probably going to have to change, no! It allows the suspension to go back and up just a little bit on that 15-degree angle, which allows your shock absorbers to absorb the shock of hitting those obstacles and the suspension sort of coming back and up. It took me a bunch of fiddling around to get this right. Had to add some extra supports, but it's looking pretty good. Oh, the other thing that happened during that cut is I filmed the bending of these two A-arm pieces on our M600. Really cool shots, just didn't press record. I'm gonna get these tacked in, make sure my geometry is still good, and if it is, we'll do the other side. I hope. Alright, let's see. Not too bad. Little bit of a camber change as we go through the travel, but truth is though, this isn't really going to be a long travel suspension setup, so wherever we end up setting it, we'll adjust our camber, and then the variation is going to be so small that it won't bother me any. But I know how to fix it for next time. Once again, huge shout out to Redbeard. This is going to be our most well-designed suspension to date, and it's big thanks to him. So in order to make this easier on myself and make sure that everything lined up, I actually made a A-arm alignment tool. I'm currently using it to prop up the tire, but once we go over to the other side, I'll show you guys how that works.